had concerns that I was worried, that would I be isolated? Would I encounter really hostile people like Charlene and Hamilton did? And I have to say, while you've found spatterings of people, but for the most part, people just let you survive. You go do your way, they went their way. One of the things I did find that we weren't allowed to join their organizations per se. We weren't allowed, in class, I was the only one in my class. Every class I've taken, I was the only Black in my class, never had any classes with other Blacks. I never had a Black professor. Some of those things. So, I got to meet people by actually going to the student center. And that's where I would see other people that look like me that I could then gravitate to, get to know, and then form alliances to do things. And that's what happened. That's how we survived on campus. We formed our own organizations. We did, our things together. We just learned to work together within the environment that we had. I refused to go to football games. I didn't get involved in that. I was happy with the basketball team. Why? Because the basketball coach would allow Black students to actually play. Football didn't allow them to play until it became popular. So, I still to this day don't go to a Georgia football game.
First stage, the pioneers, the initiators, the explosive part of the Southern Freedom Movement, which people call Civil Rights Movement, has come to a close. The battle leaves the community, and it relocate to college campuses after Selma in 1965 and Bloody Lounge of summer 1965. So that's the environment in which I attend at the University of Georgia. The second stage is one movement, the early pioneers, the desegregators, Brother Hamilton, Dr. Hamilton Home, Charlene Hunter Gault, and many others. But there was then another dynamic. How do we organize the experience? How do we make it relevant? How do we make the quality of the experience rather than just being a number, rather than just being a dark, invisible man or woman on campus? How do we become a living presence at the University of Georgia?
I served as a president at one time of the Black Student Union. I was an organizer, on campus of various activist activities. I was involved in the marches and the protests in 1970 when Athens went up kind of in flames, if you want to call it. And that was over the issue of involving desegregation of schools and a lot of other aspects of not only Athens, but the University of Georgia's response to things like the war in Vietnam, the situation that African Americans dealt with at that time in the country. So yes, I was very involved in quite a few activities. And of course, at that time, understanding your history was very important. That's why we pushed for the Black Studies programs and there to be incorporated at the University of Georgia. Black Studies classes. And I remember the first professor that they had to teach Black Studies at the University of Georgia, Professor Foley, at that time. And so, understanding your history was very important. Understanding the political framework of this country was very important. Understanding government and its relations to its people was very important. So it was kind of like a natural for me, since I found myself caught up in that movement during that time, to also want to be a history and political science major. The fledgling organization called the Black Student Union that we had at that time, we made demands upon the administration. We had, like impromptu sit-ins at the president's office, and we made ourselves, known. And of course, we refused to be invisible. I mean, we wanted to be seen, acknowledged, and we wanted to be responded to. And so that's what we did. That's how it started. And of course, it developed into something more structural over the years. But initially, it was kind of like demands being made that had to be met. The administration was kind of like touch and go, but at the same time, we had certain deans at that time, Dean Russell and a couple others. I remember Dean Tate. They were very sensitive to what was going on nationwide, and that was also affecting the University of Georgia. And I would say, they did certain things to placate. They did some, less than wholehearted type efforts, but they were trying, but the effort fell very short.
Georgia at the time was, Georgia at the time. Georgia, the university was Georgia, the state. So the good old boys were there, and they enjoyed heckling and throwing things at African American students as they walked down the street. I mean, it was overt nonsense. There was some sort of exit exam that you had to take that a lot of the Black students were failing, and they were failing that exam not because they didn't have the knowledge or the education, but the questions were socioeconomically inappropriate for someone who hadn't had that experience. There are folks that are failing here for a whole lot of reasons. One, they don't want to be here and they don't feel welcome, and it's hard to thrive, let alone survive in that kind of environment. Number two, you've got folks that have expectations of you from the viewpoint of an Anglo-Saxon, and I am not that, so or you have students that are not that, so they cannot understand your reference point because it is not theirs. But when you come to something from this standpoint and this standpoint, and there's no roads for that process to meet in the middle, you end up with folks that are on two sides of the divide all the time. And that's, that correcting that divide requires some really hard work. And I don't think that is the work that minorities need to do, although we've always been given the responsibility to do that work.
Well, I think for me, the incidents were limited to probably some individualized things. There was at least one particular fraternity, a white fraternity, that would celebrate the Old South, and it was widely known that they would, of course, dress up in Confederate garb. They would seek out, and I guess they paid them, I don't know, little African-American youngsters in the community to ride these floats, and sort of in a celebration of the Confederacy. That was clearly an issue for us. I remember when I was a freshman, I believe we were playing basketball, some of my friends, and we actually had an encounter with the UGA Police Department that I would not describe as positive when we were contacted and asked to show ID, essentially that we were, that it was okay for us to be playing basketball there. That was something that kind of stands out, particularly since I later became a UGA police officer. And I think that I actually made a complaint in that regard about that. I don't really know how that got resolved. There was certainly no other reason for us to be in a gymnasium full of individuals. There was certainly no other reason that I could have seen for us to have been contacted in that regard. So there was an issue, right? And we addressed that and we dealt with it. But that clearly was not the vast majority of my experience at UGA. And I can't speak to others. As a general matter, again, I enjoyed my tenure at the University of Georgia, and would, if I had to pick one of two boxes about whether relationships and things like that were positive or negative, I would say overall, I mean, they were positive, save for some incidents that, again, we spoke to and addressed.
And I had one experience in the English department that was a life lesson, and it wasn't pleasant. It was taking my major classes. I had a professor who I would raise my hand to answer questions, and she would ignore me. And I was the only African American in my class. I would get C's on my papers, didn't understand it because I had not gotten anything less than a B on a paper and had gotten all A's in my classes. So I went to talk to her, and what she said to me was, Ms. Davis, your people tend to not do well in English. Ma'am, I exempted a freshman English class. I, passed the AP English course. I said, and I haven't made anything less than an A at this point. And she said, I'm sorry, but the best thing that you can hope to get from me is a C. That was my first, just like in your face racism, right? I was hurt and I knew I was going to get a C. And that's my only C in my major. And every time I look at my transcript and see it, I'm angry all over again. But the good news is that going back to her classroom, I thought I was going to shrink in that place because I knew I wasn't going to get any love from her. But one day I was so angry, I kept raising my hand. I didn't stop raising my hand. They asked, where did I think a passage from a book we were reading came from? And I yelled out, it's the Book of Ruth in the Bible. Because I spent, growing up in the South, we spent a lot of time in church. And she looked around the class and she says, doesn't anybody know the answer to that question? And surprisingly enough, my classmate said she answered the question. Did you not hear her? She was raising her hand. She yelled it. She said, well, since nobody knows, the answer is the Book of Ruth in the Bible. And I was so demoralized, so horrified. And I refused to let her see my tears. And I walked out of the classroom after it was over, and some students came to me and they apologized. They said, we're so sorry that happened to you. We're sorry that she did that to you. We see what she's doing. I learned to just go in class. Don't sit in the back row. Sit in the front row. Sit as close up as you can. Listen, take good notes. To rely on, like I said, my Black UGA family, for people who've taken the same classes, study together, work together, so we can get out together. And that was pretty much my experience.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. Panelists, please feel free to go ahead and turn on your cameras. We are so excited to have you today. My name is Dr. Jemelleh Coes, and I am a professor here at the University of Georgia, and I am also an alumni of the University of Georgia, and I am so glad to be here with you today to learn from you, to engage with you. Abolitionist Elizabeth Cady Stanton tells us that the history of the past is but one long struggle upward to equality. If we are to dismantle the ongoing racial tensions in our society, it's incumbent upon the students, staff, and faculty, and university community as a whole to lean in, to have critical conversations that have led us here, to have the conversations that will propel us forward, and to have the conversations that are potential barriers to progress. As we radically imagine a future for our nation in which the lives of Black and Brown people not only matter, but we imagine a future in which they thrive consistently. Your voices are essential. What we know is that many of the Black and Brown students who have come through the doors and walked through the arches have found success and have had the opportunity to thrive. But at what cost? At what cost was it to those who came before us? And what is the debt still owed for those who will follow? And most importantly, what can we learn from your experiences? What will make our top academic institution a model for inclusivity? I invite you, the audience, to ask questions of our panelists. You may put your questions in the chat box. Today, we celebrate and hear from our esteemed panel of alumni and reflect with both gravity and gladness their experiences at our beloved institution. Welcome, panelists, and welcome, UGA community. I'd love to kick off the first question with sort of an open question. And that question is for anyone who would like to answer. What are some common misconceptions that people have about UGA and potentially about the experiences of Black students?
Jemelleh, I can kick that off. I think
Please.
when I'm out recruiting students to UGA, one of the things that people assume is that there is no Black experience among Black students at UGA, that you cannot get, quote unquote, the HBCU experience, that we are not as socially conscious, woke, or aware of our own Blackness, of our culture, of our own unique lived experiences as African Americans. And that could not be further from the truth. I tend to challenge them and say we might be a little bit more militant than they are because we live these experiences. We've walked through the paths of microaggression. We understand quite clearly what implicit bias looks like. And we are a very close-knit group of people. We love on each other. We support each other. We party with each other. And I would challenge anybody to come to one of our homecoming experiences. But I think that they would be quite surprised. And that our Black alumni are engaged. We're engaged with our students. And we're engaged with each other. And we donate. We raise money. We have an endowed scholarship. So I think the shocking part is to me that they don't know us because they're not us and they need to come see us.
Absolutely. And Ms. Butler, you sort of alluded to that in your, when you talked about creating the community and finding the community and connecting with the people who helped you through. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and what some of those communities were?
Well, yes, good morning, everyone. It's glad to be here with you. Certainly, as Ericka said, we had our own way and our own community. Like I said in the opening there, I had my community all at the Student Union Center. That's where we began. We started our own organization so that we could have our own experiences, so we could be together, we could protest together, we could study together, we could socialize together. So it was very critical for me, because that will be the only way, if I'm on campus, to have some sort of campus life. Because as I said, we were excluded from their organizations and weren't allowed to be a part of that. But again, it really helped me to really understand how great we as a Black race were and are. And so it really helped me to really start a lot of the activities that I'm involved in now and continue to be involved in, to be a part of that. So being together as a community was very critical for me. That's where I had my own sisterhood with my sisters and my brothers, so that we could do things together and have our own lives on campus, and enjoy that experience.
Absolutely. And Mr. Thomas, in connection with the Creating the Community, you were the president of the Black Student Alliance. Is that right?
I wasn't the president of the Black Student Alliance. I later, as an alumni, became involved with, I was on the alumni board there, but all of those were postgraduate experiences. I've been involved with the Black Alumni Council, and I serve now on the SPIA Board of Visitors. When I was at UGA, in fact, one of those photographs showed me, I was a member of the Committee for Black Cultural Programs, and what we did was bring activities, events, speakers, things like that that were, obviously uniquely of interest to the African American students at the university.
Absolutely. Now we have some questions coming in, and the questions are related to the faculty at UGA. So I'm going to pose a couple of questions in hopes to sort of bring forth a few different answers from you. So the exact question is, how long did the blatantly racist English teacher, the English faculty member, Ms. Davis, that you had, remain at the University of Georgia? And were there systems in place for students to evaluate faculty at that time? As a follow-up to the question for everyone is, were there professors and faculty members that you remember that stood out to you, who either stood up directly for the rights and equal protections of Black and Brown students, or were there ones that sort of that you knew blatantly were anti the activism and did not want to engage fully with Black students? So I'll open that to the panel. And Ms. Davis, you will answer that question now directly.
Oh, sure. Ironically, I think God is the great equalizer, because it was a way for students to evaluate her. Being the only African-American in that class, I was wondering what that would look like at the end of the year. But magically, I found out that she retired the next year. And so I'd like to think that the same students that came to me and embraced me and said, hey, we see what she's doing. And we just want you to know that we support you. I'd like to think they kind of took care of that in the evaluation, because she retired. And I can say that later on, Park Hall is still my favorite place. It's a hefty climb up the hill, but it's still my favorite place because I took a class called Oppression in Literature. And there I met a white professor who was very invigorating, very exciting. And she talked about, we read Frederick Douglass, the autobiography of Frederick Douglass. She talked about how literature has nuances about oppression in it. And that class helped me a great deal. And then I had another great professor who looked at me and said, you're a great writer. You can write. And so that was validating, and it negated that experience for me at UGA. And then we had Dr. Knapp, and Bill probably remembers that when Dr. Knapp came on as president, he had a commitment of hiring 20 African-American faculty at the time, and he brought in Brendis Jenkins, more faces that look like us, not of course, in comparison to all the faces on faculty and staff, not the same, but he ushered in an era while I was at UGA that made you feel a lot better about your experience in the classroom.
Other faculty encounters that you want to tell us about? And the floor is always open for that. And I invite you to tell us more about that. But I want to make a connection between what Ms. Butler's experience and Ms. White's experience, what sort of what happened in the in-between. So when Ms. Butler started talking about her experience, it was more so you lived and let live. People did their own thing, they let you do your own thing. But as Ms. White described her experience, it was more a direct harm that was being done to Black and Brown students. So the question for you, Ms. White, and for everyone, besides the Black students, who was standing up with the Black students against the injustice that was being experienced?
You asked who was standing up for the Black
Yes.
students? That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, while I was there, I think we stood up for ourselves. You know, that was it. And I think going back to the previous question, we were talking about creating a community so that you feel like you have a sense of belonging. My senior year, the Black Theatrical Ensemble was founded on UGA, and so sorry that Mr. Calhoun couldn't be here because he was the founder and I was one of the founding members. But that created an amazing community, you know, for those folks that weren't in fraternities or sororities that wanted to make, you know, make a contribution to our community. And what was unique about BTE at the time was that we were making a social statement through the works that we created, because you know, they were now BTE is this big theatrical thing, but we were, you know, we were putting together skits and things that made statements about our experiences on campus. That's what BTE was. And it allowed us to support ourselves and to have a voice in the community for people to see us and to hear us. I think that, you know, my experience was there might have been, I was in the science track. So I'm a veterinarian now. I went to Tuskegee. That's where I got my veterinary degree. But when I was at UGA, the reason why I went to UGA was because I wanted to go to vet school. And so being on that track, you know, you were in these huge classes where you were one of 2 Blacks, maybe. Most of the time I was the only one, and you weren't seen because it was a class of 200 students. So looking for support, I don't remember getting a lot of it. I remember finding my voice at UGA, learning to stand up for myself when I ran into challenges, didn't know I could do it, you know, didn't know that that was an option. And then when I realized that if I just like Ms. Davis, you know, stood up for herself and said, you will see me, you will hear me, I was, you know, I got people to hear and see me so that I could move along and do the things that I wanted to do.
Can I add something?
Yes, please.
To that particular question? I think Yusuf might also add something to that also. Back in May of 1970, something happened nationally that caused some white students to seek some semblance of solidarity with Black students. And what that event was, students, white students at Kent State University were killed by National Guard protesting the Vietnam War. All of a sudden, some white students, because some of them are hippies, the Weathermen, various other organizations, they realized not only were Black students being killed at Jackson State and also at South Carolina State, but now white students are being killed. And at that time, they began to form some, as I indicate, some semblance of solidarity with Black students to at least acknowledge that there were issues beyond just the issues of Vietnam War, but there were issues of racial issues of the very existence of African Americans in this country. So I think that was kind of the turning point that I saw in 1970, in May of 1970.
Let me add to that statement from my friend. We call him Slim from the old days. Let me add, every era was different. I came to the University of Georgia in 1966. Miss Butler was a student along with myself. That era was really different from the era when Dwight came in 1969, even though each subsequent era built on the era that came before. Now, 3 points. Yes, in the first era, we had to protect ourselves even physically. I remember the first night I'm in the dorm, the lone African American in the Black folk room, 213 Reed Hall. I step out to take a shower, come back in the hall, and there's lines of Caucasian males all around the wall. And they designate this in basher. That's what I would call him. He has a lot of backup. And he comes up to me and says, "Here comes the little in boy." Now this is different from when Charlene Hunter and Hamilton Hamp was there, because the cameras was everywhere. You got to understand, this is an 18-year-old boy, mama not there, friends not there, daddy not there, principal not there, and he's looking up, being called the N-word, and around the wall, at least 100 Caucasian males ready to pounce. So I made the quick decision to counteract that with a very aggressive battery against this young man. I tried to slap him all across the room. When that happened, all the other male students came to a halt. They did not move. The young man who did the end bashing did not retaliate. The crowd began to disperse. 5 minutes after I got back in my room, I'm making a point. We had to stand up for ourselves. That's the point I'm making. I had 3 very kind Caucasian male students to come in my room. One of them was a graduate of the high school that Dwight attended, Avondale High School. And they told me that we apologize for what happened. And as long as you're at the University of Georgia, anything happen, come see us. Now I'm gonna finish with this. The next day, the student who I struck came up behind me and pat me on the shoulder, put his hands out and shook it, and had a $20 bill in there. I remember his name. I could call his name right now. I could tell you what city he's from. He's from Macon, Georgia. I'm thinking I've slapped this guy and he rewarded me, Dwight, with a bonus, $20. Now back then, $20 was a lot of money. for those of you who don't know. But what did that teach me? One of the co-founders of the original Black Student Union. It told me that in a very perverse and strange way, if you want to survive at the University of Georgia, you must embody the myth of the crazy end. And that was our approach. And we were very aggressive in starting a collaborative movement. Slim saw the end of it with SDS and the Kent State killing, but actually the Black Student Union started off in 1967 with a coalition between a Southern Black white student organization, SDS, Student for a Democratic Society, and the late Leonard Palester, who was co-founder. We founded the Black Student Union at a beer joint in Athens called the Fifth Quarter. We talked to these whites, formed a coalition, and from that laid the basis for the foundation for the betterment of African-American life on the University of Georgia campus, even until this day. And I'm gonna say this about Dwight, and I'm gonna comment on what Ms. Butler said, I'm gonna be finished. Dwight was able to bring to a head something we started in 1966, and that was a complete loop and tie into the African-American community. As a freshman, I spent more time personally in the Black community in Athens than I spent on campus. We had intricate ties. And when Dwight came, he further enhanced those ties by making collaborative ties with the high school students. And they had their own issues at Athens High School. And we coalesced with them along with these white students and formed the last legitimate civil rights movement in the South, other than Memorial, known as the Battle of Athens. That was in the late winter and spring of 1970. The Black community was involved, old folk, young folk, middle-aged folk, professional class. The Black students were involved. The Black faculty that we had was involved. White faculty was involved. And even the conservative frats and sororities were involved in that movement. It lasted for about 5 or 6 months, and it came to a head, as Dwight indicated earlier, with the murder of those 4 students at Kent State. So thank you for your patience. I just wanted to lay that because that was the foundation that led to the evolution of what appears to be now a very sophisticated and complex African-American student life at the University of Georgia. And I'm so happy for the students who currently are attending very, very fine institution.
Mm-hmm. So thank you so much for sharing that story and those reflections. 2 things in particular. You can whisper the name of the guy who gave you the $20 and we can ride over to Macon and get the rest of your money because he owes you some more.
Are you serious? Dwight? No, I say it loud. I'm Black and I'm proud. I don't know. You might could Google him. You may could go on social media if he's still living. His name was Tom Hutchison out of Macon, Georgia.
Write that down. Tom
Hutchison.
Tom. So in connection to, because the other thing you said is a very good point, the evolution of what has happened at UGA is so interesting because at the time, as you said, at the time when Hamilton was there, there were lots of cameras. There was all eyes were on UGA. So what could have potentially been terrible was made less so. And then through the evolution, it's sort of like the camera started to go away, and so terrible things started to happen. So what I'd love to bring in today is the students who are currently at UGA, who are getting ready to graduate. Ms. Davis and Mr. Kelly, thank you so much for being here. And I would love for you to tell us about what the current climate is at UGA related to race relations. And also, one of the questions that we have is, what have been your experiences, particularly in regards to the Black Lives Matter movement and campus activism? And also in connection with that, what is the landscape of Black identity at the University of Georgia?
I can go first. I will say that I had the opportunity to interview some of the panelists, so I really got to see the transition of what life was like earlier on campus, when things were definitely not as nice as they are now. I will say that many Black students at UGA will say that still today, we still face microaggressions. There are still some instances in which we have kind of heightened racial climates, especially I remember my freshman year when a student at a football game said something derogatory towards Justin Fields when he was here. I remember my sophomore year when the video from the students at TKE came out. But outside of those things, I think the beauty about the foundation that Mr. Salaam and Mr. Thomas laid is that has blossomed into a vibrant community. I remember when Mr. Salaam told me that he was excited that they were able to get 100 new Black students through recruitment, and now there are over thousands of us now. That is amazing to see. And I think that we still have that bond within Bugga, as we call it today. And it just, especially now that our Greek life has flourished so much since 1969, and I really appreciate the way that Black students have continued to recruit other Black students. And I think that is key in keeping the university growing in diversity, growing in different talents of all different races and things like that, is that we continue to make sure that if we're going to climb up the ladder, that we hold it back down so that others may follow through mentorship, through different organization mentorship with other students, incoming students. Caleb and I are tour guides, so every time I get a Black student on my tour, and I know when Caleb probably gets a Black student on my tour, I make sure that I am extra special to pull them aside and talk to them and address any of their concerns. But now I think when I drive through Lumpkin, seeing Black Lives Matter flags in people's windows that I know aren't Black students, or getting to have conversations with other white students that I don't think would have ever happened maybe 30, even probably 15 years ago, having conversations with them, acknowledging what's happening and acknowledging the role that our university has played in oppression, all kinds, slavery to segregation to now. And having them recognize that and say that, what can I do to help, is really the next step to making sure that UGA is more inclusive and just overall welcoming place for all students of color.
I would say in my experience at the University of Georgia, I was recruited here through the Georgia African American Male Experience, an initiative put on by the Office of Institutional Diversity. And I was already committed, but through this program, it really was a cherry on top, because I thought I was gonna have to be the only Black student in all of my classes, and I was able to be in a class of, in this game class, it was 23 Black students that I already got to meet before I got on campus. And we connected, and when we chose to stay in the same residence hall. So when I got to UGA, I was surrounded by a lot of other Black males. And one thing that drew me to UGA was when I went to this program, I was able to see a lot of the Black students weren't just students, they were leaders on campus. And I saw that they were flourishing on campus. So that kind of showed me that, wow, when I go to UGA, maybe I have the opportunity to be successful here as well. 8% of UGA is Black. And while that does sound like a very small number, when you see it in person at a tailgate or at a Bugga event, it definitely is a community there. And everyone together, it definitely has a small HBCU feel. But in my experience at UGA, while there are hard, tough moments like during the Black Lives Matter movement, those those moments also pushed for social change. A lot of our white friends and a lot of our non-Black students at UGA were forced to make a post or give a stance. A lot of organizations, UGA was pushed to make a stance on certain issues. And I think the Black students on campus really were able to make some noise and push for social change. So I definitely appreciate all of the strides that we have made to bring a change to our campus and the world.
Absolutely. And every time one of those statements come out, I am looking for UGA and seeing what we are saying. And if we are standing strong toward equity, social justice, and toward Black Lives Mattering and being a loud voice in that space for sure. And a question that I have for everyone is, what have you learned about yourself and your identity as being a Black person in society during your time or since your time at UGA?
I think I learned the knowledge of self in a very deep way when we fought for and acquired a Black Studies program. Most of what's popular now in terms of African American history, we had studied that stuff at the age 18, 19, 20 years old. It really gave us, coming out of Jim Crowism and segregation, a new sense of self and identity that it's all right to be Black. That if you Black, you don't have to get back. That vital lesson has carried me over 50 years since I left the University of Georgia. We studied our history. We studied the Black experience, not just in America, but in Africa as well. I think that's the prime lesson. And I'm hoping that even with the progress that the students that attend now are exposed to that same kind of identity entrenching experience is very important.
I think I learned in my 3 years here, I've learned a lot about myself. And I guess I went to a high school where everybody looked like me, so I wasn't in constant contact with my Blackness all the time that I am now. And having to recognize that on almost a daily basis, and just knowing that I am a Black person in a space where people don't look like me, having to interact with that on a daily basis has made me more aware of my history, more kind of in wanting to seek more information about how can I better serve my own community, and what am I doing to actively acknowledge the change that needs to happen in the world around me. And it's made me overall more aware of those things, and making sure that I hold people who don't look like me accountable to the things that they say, the promises they make to support Black students. And it really is a beautiful experience, I think, being here and being able to be around, like Caleb said, Black leaders on campus. It's a beautiful thing. I like to think all the Black students here have some role or another on some space of our campus, even though our campus is so big. And especially because we're only 8%, seeing how many Black students have been able to become orientation leaders, who've been able to become presidents of SGA and all those kinds of things, really shows you that while we are here, even though that, we may be the only people in some of our classes, we are still making an effort to make a presence on campus. And it kind of just made me realize that I'm going to have to do that throughout the rest of my life, because everywhere I go, there are going to be people who don't look like me. There are going to be people who don't like the color of my skin. But as long as I take the extra initiative to become a leader and enter those spaces and make my presence known, I will be fine. And I think that's what I've learned as a student here.
I want to piggyback on Jessica because she's my daughter. So in the second generation, about to be an alumni. And just listening to her, the reason I get parents all the time ask me, you went here, would you send your child here? And I said, absolutely, for the reason that she just spoke. One of the things, and she did go to, we live in Clayton, Miss Butler, I got to do this because time ago, and she's been on the civil rights train and making sure that the people's agenda that Black folks are know who they are. And so I'm always honored to be in her space. But I sent her to, she went to all Black schools. So when she got ready to come to UGA, we had a long talk about my experience and what she could expect for her experience. But I ended up telling her the same thing that my dad told me when he sent me here, because he graduated from an HBCU. He said, I'm sending you to UGA because the world does not look like you, and the people who lead the world right now, the majority of them do not look like you. You need to learn how to navigate in their spaces, and you need to come out of that experience knowing that you are inferior to no one, and that you have a responsibility to not only to uplift your race, but to also uplift the minds of people who don't think that your race is equal to or have the ability to do the same things that they do and navigate in the spaces that they do successfully. So in her freshman year, when she became a little bit overwhelmed by the experience, and she called me, and I said to her, you cannot sit in the back of the room. You have to sit in the front of the room. You have to, she said, well, I feel slightly intimidated raising my hand. I said, I didn't raise you to be intimidated by anybody. You raise your hand, you see your answer. I said, because here's the thing that you need to know. When you walk in that classroom, you carry all of your ancestors in that classroom. They are sitting behind you and around you and with you, whether you can see them or not. And here's who you come from. And I began to start telling her from her grandfather to her great-grandfather to her great-grandmother, all the way to her uncles and aunts. I said, and every time you carry us with you, and I expect to see you walking through the arch 3 years from now, period. And so I can tell you my experience at UGA gave me a level of confidence I may not have had I not gone through the fire, walked over the glass, walk over the eggshells, just to be able to be myself. I was co-chair of the Student Advocacy Committee for Black Affairs Council. We went from BSU to the BAC, Black Affairs Council. And one of the things we marched, like Bill said, in front of the KA House. And I went to a school with Hamilton Holmes Jr. So when Hamilton Holmes would come to visit and Charlene Hunter Galt would come to visit, we were like, here come the first Black man and the first Black woman, and paid homage to them and their sacrifice. And Mary Frances Early now, who has been that hidden figure for so long. And I'm so proud that now that she is getting the shine and the love that she deserves. But being able to protest O'Malley's, because, there's the school culture, but there's the Athens culture, where they would charge.
I think we lost you.
Yes.
All right, Ms. Davis, we're gonna come back to you. But we are ready. We are close to time right now. So before we wrap up, and Ms. White, looks like you have something to say, and Ms. Butler, is that correct?
Well, I was just going to echo everything they said, because what it really taught me is that I could compete with anybody in the world, that, no one was better than we were. We're as good as we want to be, and we can compete anywhere we want to compete. So that's what UGA taught me. That was my life lessons from UGA.
I think mine, I have to echo that as well. I think, as I said earlier, I found my voice at UGA and got really clear that if I'm going to achieve anything, I'm going to need to be my highest and best advocate, and that no one can dictate to me what my level of success is going to be. I had, an instructor, one of my science instructors, when he discovered that I was interested in going to veterinary school, encouraged me not to try because he wasn't successful. So how on earth could I be? So it's that kind of thing. Had I listened to any of these people who tried to define who I was through their eyes, you just can't succeed that way. And I want to say to Yusuf, I thank you so much for your work in getting those classes in place. I was a transfer student, so I didn't do 4 years at UGA. I did my last 2 years at UGA. And when I got ready to enter my third quarter, I had an opportunity to do an off-campus thing. And what was standing in my way was somehow the transfer hours didn't match up. And they wanted to tell me I needed to stay on campus to take these English literature courses. Well, I'd taken lots of English literature courses before I came to UGA. I did not need to take English lit and listen about Chaucer and all of that kind of, I just didn't need to do that again. And I had to go through the English department, et cetera. But those African-American literature courses, I needed a history course. Those were courses that were choices for me. I had to advocate for them. I had to go to the department chairs in the history department and the English department to advocate for using those courses as an exchange. But they gave me light and they allowed me to read and explore and learn where that hadn't been offered to me before. So thank you so much for your work. But I think that experience at UGA and the success that I had in advocating for myself and demanding that unless you could tell me why not, then I knew that I could. And that has followed me throughout my life. So I would say that's the big thing for me.
Absolutely. As a graduate of the Mary Frances Early College of Education, I truly believe now that there is no room that I don't belong in, no space that I cannot thrive in. And that is in part due to the experience that I also had at UGA. So thank you for echoing all of those sentiments today. So we're wrapping up. But I would like to give Mr. Bill Thomas a final word, because you spoke about having very positive experiences. And if there's one way that we can continue to replicate those positive experiences, what would that be?
I just think that we all have to be advocates for UGA. I came to the game a little late in terms of, the alumni experience. I moved away from Georgia for a while, but when I moved back, I just had a little girl, and I realized, I wanted her to be a part of the UGA experience, or at least have the opportunity to do that. And I became involved with the Alumni Association probably about 20, 25 years ago. And I think you started out with, the experience or the negative or the myths that people have about UGA, and they're out there. And I think Ericka spoke about those. UGA is, we've all heard the history. We all know the history, but UGA is just a microcosm of America. And we just got to kind of keep driving forward and I think spread the word about UGA, all of the things it has to offer. UGA has a global footprint, and we need to be part of that. And
absolutely.
To the extent that there are people out there who don't understand that or don't know that, we've got to let them know that, and hopefully UGA will be an option for those kids. I'm just so proud of, I guess, what I see all these younger students doing, and it's just amazing.
Absolutely, absolutely. I couldn't agree. Spread the good word of what's happening at UGA and continue to make it better. So what we have learned here today will surely linger with us for years to come.
Sister Butler, it's good seeing you after all these years.
What our alumni have shared with us is an invitation to do more, to be courageous in the work and to reflect on our experiences and to take action toward better. I cannot express my deepest gratitude to all of you, all of the panelists, for your time and energy. So, dogs, let us go forth and not forget the vision of progress. The vision of progress that our university strives for: to teach, to serve, and to inquire into the nature of things. for it is only then that we become more critically reflective in our thought and more aware of the world around us. Go Dogs.
Can I make one more comment?
Please, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think the one thing that I really appreciate from this panel is Jessica and Caleb and the positive experiences that you shared. It gives me some hope for UGA. My experience was not that. And so I'm glad that you are enjoying your experience at UGA, that you're learning the significance of your being at UGA and continuing the fight, the movement forward for all of us. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, take care. Enjoy the rest of the conference, everyone. Thank you for connecting today. Have a good one.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks. See ya.